Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. If someone wants to put something in chat, just to make sure. Wonderful. Well, good morning, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. I am thrilled to welcome you to this virtual space where we will have the opportunity to hear from a diverse panel of Cape Bretoners as they have what I know will be a rich discussion about this year's International Women's Day theme, Choose to Challenge. My name is Kathleen Yurchis, and I'm the CEO of the Cape Breton Regional Chamber of Commerce. Together with Mayor Amanda McDougall, Mayor of the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, Carla Arsenault, President and CEO of the Cape Breton Partnership, and Lynn McCarron, Executive Director of United Way of Cape Breton, we are jointly pleased to host you for today's virtual panel discussion in celebration of International Women's Day. Before we begin, I would like to first acknowledge that we are gathered here today in the unceded traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people here in Unama'ki, Cape Breton. We honor and thank the Mi'kmaq for sharing their territory with us. So, when organizing this panel for today, we first looked to the theme for this year's International Women's Day. This year, as I mentioned, the theme is Choose to Challenge. Today, you will notice that our panel discussion includes both men and women, because we believe that advocacy, inclusive mindsets, and tangible action are needed from all. We are here today choosing to challenge because gender balance is not solely a women's issue, and achieving gender parity is work that needs to be done by everyone. So without further ado, I know that we only have an hour with you, or a little bit less than that, and we have lots to talk about. So I would like to take the next few moments to introduce our moderator and our panelists for today's discussion and welcome them to our virtual stage. As I introduce each of our moderator and each of our panelists, they will join me here on the virtual stage. And then when everyone is here and we can see everyone, I will step away from the camera and microphone and allow space for this really exciting and informative discussion. So we are so thrilled and honored to have our moderator of the panel today be Annette Verschuren. Annette is the Chair and Chief Executive Officer of NRStor, Inc., an energy storage development company. In previous roles, she has been the President of Home Depot Canada, Michaels Canada, the Vice President of Corporate Development of Amasco Limited, Executive Vice President of Canada Development Investment Corporation. She is currently a Director of Air Canada, Canada National Resources Limited, Liberty Mutual Insurance Group, Supato Inc., and is Chair of Mars Discovery District and the Sustainable Development Technology Canada. She currently serves as Chancellor of Cape Breton University and is a board member of CAMH Foundation. In 2011, she was made an Officer of the Order of Canada for her contribution to the retail industry and corporate social responsibility, and is a member of the Canadian Business Hall of Fame. She currently sits on the NAFTA Advisory Council and holds an honorary doctorate degree to 9 universities, including St. Francis Xavier University, where she has earned a Bachelor of Business Administration degree. Welcome, Annette. You're such an example of a powerful woman for today's celebrations.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to welcome Sarah Mccray. Sarah has worked in post-secondary education and has spent the last decade immersed in the fields of communication and education. She is currently a senior lab instructor in the Department of Communication and Languages at Cape Breton University, and is a communication coach and owner of SMR Communication, Speech Made Right. Sarah is passionate about inclusive language, gendered and mediated communication, and educating others on the importance and influence our language has on the climates we create and contribute to. Sarah holds a Bachelor of Arts in Community Studies with honors in communication from Cape Breton University. Next, welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to welcome Mary Beth Doucette. Mary Beth is an assistant professor and Purdy Crawford Chair at CBU's Shannon School of Business. She is also a member 2 band member and a doctoral student in management at St. Mary's University. With a focus on interactions between Mi'kmaq and Canadians, Mary Beth researches how people and organizations use policies and procedures to share knowledge in culturally informed ways. Mary Beth is currently working on a research project, A Shared Future, that is rooted in the desire for reconciliation between groups and with the environment. She has a Bachelor of Engineering in Industrial and in Engineering from Dalhousie University and an MBA in Community Economic Development from Cape Breton University. Welcome, Mary Beth. Thanks. Bradley Sheppard. I will now like to welcome Bradley to the stage. Bradley has spent nearly 20 years in the Canadian Armed Forces leading small teams, and in 2019 formed Sheppard Diversity with the goal to teach diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity in organizations and communities. His lived experience gives him a unique perspective on difference and how to leverage such difference to create inclusive environments. Bradley is currently employed at NSCC as a student advisor in African Canadian supports and serves on various community boards. He possesses a master's degree in education with a focus on Afrocentric leadership. And last but certainly not least, I would like to welcome Scott Thomas to our virtual stage. Scott currently works at Cape Breton University as a Human Rights and Diversity Officer, leading CBU's initiatives in being a respectful campus. Throughout his career, he has spoken internationally about the changing workplace and the need for diversity to be celebrated in these spaces. In November 2010, he presented before a committee of the United Nations in New York City regarding the reorganization of diversity in third world countries and the need to address the blight through education. Scott is a graduate from Cape Breton University with a diploma in public administration, a BA in political science and communication, and holds a Bachelor of Education as well. So I see that we're all on here, and I am going to hand it over to Annette and shut off my camera and microphone, and I look forward to being a participant and a listener in this conversation. So welcome to you all. Annette, you can take it away.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, and happy International Women's Day, everybody that's listening. What a thrill it is for me to be here in my wonderful, beautiful Cape Breton Island. I was telling the panelists that Mary Beth said, Annette, how long have you been here? And I said, a year today. We came here for a weekend and we stayed. And what a thrill it has been, let me tell you. Really, you know, to be on a panel that's organized by Kathleen, Carla, and Amanda, and many others, is such an impressive time in Cape Breton's history. I love the leadership. I love seeing the change that I'm seeing on this island. And I think, you know, as I reflect on the pandemic, I see enormous opportunity because I think people are thinking differently about the way to go forward. You know, women have been most negatively impacted by the pandemic to much greater degrees, I think 3 to 1 in terms of the negative impact, in terms of income, in terms of job loss, etc. So we've got a lot of picking up to do. And I don't want to go back to the way it was. I want to go forward with this new social license that we have. You know, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's all the great movements that we're seeing today, we have a big opportunity as a country and as a world to move forward. There's some noise on this. Are you guys hearing some noise? Can we just bring that down a bit? I don't think it's on my panelists. Okay, we got it. Thank you. So, but look, I think we're moving in a really interesting direction, and we have a big opportunity. We have an enormous opportunity to influence a great change. And so what we want to do today is talk to you about solutions, talk to you about ways in which we're going to all have to change. We're going to have to change our language. We're going to have to change our way in terms of becoming more comfortable in what we're doing going forward. We are going to have to think through how the economic and social balance needs to move forward. Look, the contribution and participation of women in our economy is so important for it. It really is. And we'll touch on all of that as we go through. But look, let's start this panel. Isn't it an impressive panel? You know, I love the men allies on this panel. Love you guys. Thank you very much for participating. It's just terrific. It really is. Because I think the importance of men in this conversation is as important as women. And I remember when I was running Home Depot, my senior person in diversity and inclusion was a male. He was a chief operating officer. It made such a difference in terms of understanding and influencing and bringing on and sponsoring women leaders. And so this is what today is all about. We're going to share with you ideas of how we can look at the way. Let's talk about language for a minute. How we're going to see changes in terms of being much more aware of our words, much more aware of how we speak to people. So let me start with Mary Beth. Mary Beth, tell me what you're seeing in terms of the changes that we need to incorporate in our lives from the perspective of a First Nations woman leader. Love to hear your comments on that.
Thanks, Annette. Yeah, well, when we chatted on Friday, I brought up a couple of different things that I'm looking at. So as I explained to the group then, a lot of the research that I'm doing now is related to reconciliation and what reconciliation looks like in the energy sector. And so from the perspective of Indigenous peoples, it's not just about gender and colonialism and trying to disrupt the structures. It's also about how those histories continue to influence what we're doing today. And I mean, you were talking about Black Lives Matter as being an issue of high importance right now, and people are really aware of it. Missing and murdered Indigenous women is also a hugely important topic for Indigenous communities, and whatever resonance we can get with people paying attention to what's going on there, I think is really important too.
Absolutely, Mary Beth. And you know, this is, Black Lives Matter is important, but I'll tell you, the Indigenous communities and the history and the reconciliation that needs to take place is enormous. And I am sort of encouraged that we're talking about this in much more open environments and open ways. And so thanks for reminding us. Absolutely important. Bradley, I'll go to you next. Tell me what you're discovering in terms of how we're changing our language, how we're talking through and how we're confronting these issues of inclusion and diversity and equity.
Well, let's start out by first welcoming everybody today. With respect to language as it relates to, diversity and inclusion, our language is really a manifestation of our thoughts, okay? And so our thoughts are influenced by our upbringing and our social conditioning, how we were raised and what we were taught in school. So I would argue that everything starts with like a sense of self-awareness, and how your self-awareness informs your thoughts, which then form your attitudes and behaviors. Understanding our biases and why they're triggers is a really good starting point. And gone unchecked, our biases can result in offensive language towards others. And this language can often be looked at like as a microaggression towards a certain group. And an example of that could be something like, you see a single mom who's working hard, and you say something like, wow, as a single mother, your kids are so well behaved. And so the intention there is to compliment a single mother, but the backhanded compliment comes when what are my kids supposed to be like, So language, depending on how we view things, our language can really affect how we interact with others.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, do you want to add to that?
Love to. Thanks, Annette. And it's so important to remember, I think language is symbolic. And this is something that is a really big area of passion for mine, because it starts at home, but we can't ignore the socio-cultural landscape that our children will go through and we learn from as adults. So language is symbolic. It shapes our perceptions of the world around us. And I think if we start to choose to challenge some of our language use and ask why we use it and what it's rooted in, it can really help to propel us forward in the fight for gender parity. So we've come a long way, but we are definitely not there yet. And I know our need to communicate is innate, but our ability is definitely learned. And we need to be willing to relearn and get uncomfortable sometimes, get comfortable with being uncomfortable when we're trying to learn new terms or the importance of some shifts in our language. In terms of gender, especially in business and in across industries and sectors, I mean, just the use of our language or our human communication patterns really matter. One example is a study shows men interrupt women 33% more often than they interrupt other men. They may do this unconsciously or subconsciously and not realize why. They may feel like they have a really strong reason to do that, but it's just challenging ourselves to step back and ask, why am I about to do this? Allowing that equal opportunity, that equitable opportunity for all of us around the table to have the same opportunity to speak and share our opinions and thoughts. The language used to describe women in certain scenarios, especially in comparison or relation to men, can be really damaging because the language we expect from women seems to be more relational, feeling oriented, and we expect action oriented communication from men. When we get the opposite, it catches us off guard and we're not sure how to receive that. So again, challenging our stereotypical thoughts or expectations around that will really change and shift the landscape and make it a more equitable world so that we can achieve that gender parity that we're all striving for.
It's terrific. I can't agree with you more. Scott, can you describe some ways we can manage this? I mean, this is all about learning and it's really understanding how to really address some of these issues. Can you give us some examples of what we can do to respond to some of this stuff?
I think, you know, the old saying, words are more powerful than the sword, is so true. And I think we have to recognize how powerful language is, but we first need to create a safe space. And that is crucial for us to have this dialogue, whether we're talking about unbiased or bias or stereotypes. We have to create an environment, first of all, that allows us to have these open dialogues. This day isn't just about posting things on Facebook. It's not just about the best Twitter feed. It's about having real dialogue and real conversation and not being afraid to open up the box and have the conversation. Not be afraid to talk about the inequalities to land for women or to housing or to mental health services or to finances or to the boardroom table. We have to have real dialogue. We have to have real discussion. That we just got off an election with a mayor who happens to be a female and was criticized more about her being pregnant than her policy. And I hope Baby Emmett goes to every council meeting from now on and really showcases that to the fact that we need to have more role models. We need to have more women like yourself, Annette, sit in the most powerful chair around the boardroom. But these things aren't going to happen by us being silent or being afraid. As Sarah said, we have to be uncomfortable. These conversations aren't easy, but they have to happen. And being uncomfortable allows us to unlearn things. So by creating a safe space, having real dialogue, I want to challenge all of us here today to really talk about the challenges that are being faced around the table, in the businesses, in the school system, in the academic world, in research, because that is what's going to make change. But it's got to come from a respectful approach.
Absolutely. I can't tell you, I watched Amanda. I watched our mayor go through those interviews and I couldn't get over it. I couldn't, but it was that strength in her, that courage to respond and fight back that got her elected. And I think what's encouraging is the people of Cape Breton did that, Cape Breton CBRM. And I think she really demonstrated an enormous amount of capacity, courage, and determination. And we're very, very lucky to have her. Sarah, you want to make a follow up on that?
Yes, please. Just two tangible, maybe simplified examples came to my mind there. And we discussed one on Friday was the importance of language. It's the same as representation. When we start to make these small changes in our language, we start to use chair instead of chairman. then we can envision and expect women in those roles. That small change has a big impact. So I challenge people to think of those terms they're using. And the second one that came to mind as I was preparing for this was, if you had a strong reaction to a potato head losing its salutation or its gender or sex-linked salutation recently, before you criticize the action, I just challenge all of us to reflect first on our reaction. So before we challenge that action, let's reflect on our own reaction and just ask ourselves why. So why do we feel uncomfortable? Why do we feel a little annoyed by that if we do? Who could this possibly be impacting positively? And is it really negatively impacting those of us who may have been wondering why they would do that? So just those small little changes really have an impact on our communities.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they're important. The small things really determine your values. And to Bradley's point, when I was a little girl, Bradley, I didn't know the difference. My parents treated me the same way, mainly because, we were all treated the same way. We were working on the farm, and I could, milk cows and shovel shit as well as my brothers could. And it wasn't until I went away to university and got in front of all these other environments that there was discrimination, right? And so, but that confidence that I had as a child came from my parents. And boy, oh boy, one piece of advice I give every parent on listening to this event: you can really influence the confidence of your children. You can influence the confidence of that child being able to do anything they want. And so I'm just a perfect example. My parents were my best friends. They were Dutch immigrants that came here in 51. I was born in 56. And that influence was enormous. Let me just change the subject a little bit, but great discussion, everybody. I love this conversation, because we need to deal, we need to confront, we need to be comfortable, and we need to move forward. Mary Beth, let's talk about intersectionality and the gender parity in the Aboriginal communities. And we have a lot to learn. I'm very excited to have been working with the Indigenous people across the country on projects and energy storage developments. And I love your perspective. You take a longer term perspective. You recognize the importance and sustainability of our world in a much better way than any of us other people do, in my opinion. And that's because we've been owners of this land for thousands of years. But can you talk to us a little bit about these issues and how they're reflected in your community?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, Annette, when you were saying, like when you grew up in Cape Breton and you were on the farm and you could do anything, that resonates with me as well. When I left Cape Breton, because my parents were both teachers and they brought me up in the community to be involved and to be, like part of the community. It wasn't until I got into school at St. Evex in engineering where I started realizing people were looking at me and expecting something different of me because they attributed my skin color to being, like something different than what they were used to seeing in the classroom. And so it's interesting that sometimes when we start growing up and leaving the nest and going to different places, that's when you really get a better sense of what your culture is and what your community is. And we discussed this on Friday. I didn't grow up on the reserve, but by virtue of the position that I'm in right now and the work that I've done with Member 2 over the years, a lot of people assume that, I grew up on the reserve and then I also have these different perceptions. So I'm very proud to be a Member 2 band member, and I'm very proud that in Member 2 we have so many women on council. But I think working in Member 2, you can see, like there's women in management positions, and it's kind of taken for granted that that's where they should be, that's where they can be. And then it's not until you get to places like in Toronto or Bay Street or wherever that you start seeing a little bit more of that pushback, and see that that's not necessarily normal or as normal as it is in the Indigenous communities, in the Mi'kmaq community especially.
Yeah, but aren't you seeing more confidence though? In the last 10, I've been in business for 44 years and very male dominated businesses, right, Mary Beth? But I see I see greater progress. I do see people challenging more, and maybe because perhaps I am one of those gals from Toronto, but I even see it here. I even see it like, when you take a look at the leadership and the changes happening in this community, we've been given support and we've been inspired to contribute in a more progressive way.
So I definitely see changes. And I'm also very cautious about being too optimistic because when I went into engineering, women in science and engineering was at its peak, I think, where people were, really, really talking about how we needed to have more women in science, more women in engineering, and we need to create better pathways for that. But then it started to decrease again. Like the statistics showed that women stopped registering for courses in science and engineering. They stopped registering for courses as there was less pressure, I guess, in the education system, or as there was less awareness of this issue in the education system. So we can't just say, well, we've got there and we're done. This is going to be an ongoing dialogue to create systemic change.
I think so too. Bradley, I can tell you have a comment here. You're on.
There we go.
You're on mute.
No, just really listening to what Mary Beth is saying. And for folks that are out there and don't know what intersectionality is, it's really the interconnected nature of social categorizations. They include like race, class, gender, and they apply to a given individual, but they often overlap, creating discrimination and disadvantage. So when I say that, if you look, society's place of a woman would be one down, a man would be, one up. So if you have a woman of color, so you have a woman and then she's of color, that intersection really defines the individual and can really leave them from the table in terms of hiring practices and mentorship opportunities.
Yeah, no, and you know what, I've seen that in my career. I've seen that in my life, Bradley, and I do think that the recognition and the ability to talk about this and the ability to change the way we hire people and the ability to I don't know how many organizations I'm on now where BIPOC, which is the 50% women and 30% people of color or different cultures, that's become it's moving. Is it moving fast enough? I don't know, but it is moving absolutely in the direction. Now, the numbers are not looking good in the last year. During the pandemic, we didn't make much progress in terms of some of these areas. We've really got an opportunity, I think, today to really, I'm seeing corporations and companies and CEOs talking about this in a much more open environment than they used to. It was the last thing on an agenda of a board meeting, on all my board meetings. It's become the first. It's become the climate change and social people issues have become number one and number two on agendas on boards. Thank God. It's always been number one and number two in my agenda when I go into these board meetings. But when I don't have the allies of men, it is really difficult. It doesn't stop me. I'm very respectful about these issues. I do it. I bring it to everybody's attention all the time. But now I'm seeing more men getting involved in this. Scott, tell me what men can do to really help out here. Give me some examples of how we can engage. Women can engage men more and men can engage women more on this topic.
Well, I think the first thing is to learn to listen and pay attention to ways in which individuals want help. Being an ally doesn't mean that you tell them. It's about listening and know when to step back and know when to step in. And that can be a challenge because we are pretty entitled and we need to check the entitlement at the door. And we also need to recognize this thing called white privilege that I have. And that doesn't mean that I drive a brand new vehicle or that I have a glorious house. It means that when I walk into a meeting and my colleague who happens to be a female and another person just happens to only take my opinion when the female is telling the same concept, is that we have to use our privileges wisely. And I think to Mary Beth's point earlier about intersectionality, we also need to recognize that even amongst women, there's privilege. And when you start going down and breaking or unraveling the onion, that there are intersectional approaches that are challenged. So we have to really check ourselves. And it goes back to attitude. My goodness, we have to check ourselves all the time. We have to have a willingness to recognize ourselves and to recognize that there's a willingness to unlearn at times, that we have to check those bias that Bradley talked about, our stereotypes that exist because we're human. But we need to spend a lot more time listening than talking. In the concept, we need to have conversations, but we need to listen and not be afraid to listen and not have an answer. But I think as an ally, it is truly someone who asks and doesn't assume what you need. So we need to start doing that.
Absolutely. You know, Scott, one time people asked me, why did I leave Cape Breton? I wanted to do more, but I left because I felt no one was listening to me. And I would be sitting around these conference room tables, and I would be making a point, and 4 minutes later, a male colleague of mine would make that point, and everybody be listening to him. And so, well, you know what's really has changed though, Scott? Maybe because I'm getting older. But now today, when something like that happens, because it still does, a male colleague will say, Annette just made that. Yeah. Annette just made that same comment. You know, why aren't we listening to her? And that, you know what? And that's
call it out.
And that's you can say it nicely.
Call it out.
Call it out. Like, don't be afraid to call it out. Call it out nicely, respectful. People aren't going to learn otherwise.
And don't be afraid to be that thorn in the side that always has to call it out. I know that I got labeled with that many times, but you know, I've also walked out of the room and the person has said to me, thank you. Thank you for giving me a voice. Yeah. You know, I get this sometimes where people in different organizations will call upon me to give a talk or to take part in a rally. And I sit back and I say, I'm not going to take part, but I know of somebody who can. And that's about helping smash that glass ceiling, because it can't be on the backs of all the females smashing that ceiling. We have just as much responsibility of weakening that glass ceiling as everybody else.
Yeah. Scott, I would also say that, you know, when you go into a situation, you have a situation like that, take that person aside privately.
Yes.
I do that. I celebrate publicly when I find that people are being really open and responsible and recognize diversity and inclusion. I celebrate that. But you also, sometimes it's better just to go privately and have that conversation with people, because you know, people need to learn and they want to.
And it's that safe space really yet again, creating that safe space and knowing when the time is right and when the time should move to another location. Yeah. Totally.
One of the things that I have all of my life recognized, and I think I got that in the farm, when men and women work together, there's nothing that can beat them. And every study that I'm reading, every study that you have read says, look, if the senior leadership team has diversity, if 30% of the board has women, it is amazing. The performance of these companies are significantly better than the non-performance of the company. This is an economic issue. The participation rate of women and minorities and people, I hate that word, but other people, people of color, is so critical to the diversity of the decision-making process. And I have seen the richness of content that comes to the table when you have the United Nations around you. And I think that is one of the most important things that we need to do in society. And whether it's an institution, whether it's a for-profit, non-for-profit, it's the same thing. It really, really is critical. I'd love to hear your comments on that and how we can accelerate that. Bradley, do you want to
Sure.
comment on that?
I feel gender parity is super important. You know, given females full participation to our economy only makes us stronger as a whole. I feel, you know, as someone who was raised by strong women, who's happily married to a strong woman and has two beautiful daughters, I know that women bring with them diversity of thought and unique perspectives. You know, when we allow women to participate in the economy, it promotes a sense of professional will, and professional competence. Allowing women a seat at the table allows them to inspire the next generation. In other words, if she can do it, so can I. And I think another element there is giving women opportunity creates a foundation to get more women at the table. It's kind of like diversity in diversity, so modeling that behavior.
Yeah, and Bradley, just like you model all the young children, with African backgrounds, like when people see you, when young children see you be on this panel and be part of this, the pride and the recognition that they can engage and they can be part of this, that's the inspiration that I think is really needed right across the board. But I think it's very exciting. Sarah, can you weigh in on this subject in terms of the economics of how important the participation of women is in the workforce?
I would love to. Thanks, Annette. So I think it's proven and it's been researched that leadership, empathy is essential to effective leadership. And women, stereotypically, generally speaking, are taught and nurtured to be more relational communicators from the time we're small. Males, generally speaking, are taught to be action-oriented or instrumental use of communication. So our goals of communicating are different. Women communicate to build connection and foster relationship, and men often communicate to get an action done. It's not that one is better than the other, but the culmination of both is where we'll see real progress. So empathy and leadership will drive production and drive performance in your companies, your industries, and then lead to greater success for the company and create a positive work climate for your employees and for the people working around that table, no matter how they identify on that gender spectrum. So women who use relational communication, who are in touch with those feelings and connections and that empathy, we need to change the connotation that's attached to that. That empathy is not a weakness, it is a strength, and that is beneficial for both men and women leaders, and that will trickle down in that effect. We've talked a little bit about the impacts that this pandemic has had and the regressive effect on gender equality, and you touched about that in your opening remarks, Annette, that women's jobs are 1.8% more vulnerable during this pandemic this past year. We make up 39% of the global employment, and we account for over 54% of overall job loss. So we're getting it's being communicated that we're expendable. There's reasons for this. Impacting sectors and positions held by women are feeling that the most. There's an increased burden on unpaid childcare, which disproportionately falls on women, whether that's children or aging parents. And McKinsey Global Institute, they do work and research in gender parity all year long, and they show a strong link between gender parity in society and gender equality in work. And the latter will not be achievable without the former. So we really do need to dig down, understand why we're communicating the way we are, what gendered communication is taught to us, and how to unlearn that and learn new ways to communicate, both relationally and action-oriented, both males and females doing that. I wanted to touch on one more thing while I can, and it's going off what Brad and Scott mentioned, and Mary Beth, in the classroom and at work. Bernice Sandler she was a women rights activist and researcher. She did a study called The Chilly Climate in 1964 or 5. Her findings, if you looked at that today, are still very accurate and true. So there are more women around the table than when she did the study, but they're still being treated the right way, or the same way, sorry. And that goes from those unconscious biases. So an example of that, it's the subtle ways that women are treated differently in the classroom and at work. And one of the examples that stands out to me in that study are the descriptive words used to describe both men and women. So just a few examples of that and how this impacts their roles in these organizations. So for example, men would be described as having good judgment and women good intuition. Or you see the strength and the power dynamics there. Men might be called aggressive and women hostile, or stern task manager versus hard to work for. So these types of connotations that are attached to this terminology, we really need to reshape how we understand and what communication behaviors we expect in these roles, and from women and from men around that table.
Yeah. And Sarah, I would also say that, we need to lean into this a little bit more. Like, I think that, look, we got to become more comfortable with conflict.
Right.
You know, we have to, you know, one of the things that I wrote this book and I said, one of my strategies all my life was to figure out a strategy and then start executing at about 60%. And then I made it right along the way. And I think, look, what I have discovered is that women are just as capable in everything that in every job that I've had the experience of managing or leading, and I feel that there is still a discomfort in challenging, still a discomfort in disagreeing, still a discomfort in doing that respectful. People turn away, and I think that it's really important for the generations behind us to be stronger here. I think it's important to fight this. Don't be a victim. Try to fix it. And I think we have an opportunity as a society to really not go back to the way it was, but to go forward through this change and through this new opportunity in these emerging markets. I got to give a plug for the Verschuren Center, which I'm so proud of. But Dr. Beth Mason is doing an amazing job there, creating jobs, creating new opportunities. There is so much out there that we need to celebrate. We need to share that the women are in equal positions to men and really making change. But that confidence needs to become stronger. It needs to be more recognized, and I think we need to continue to find better ways to push this forward. Can you give me some ideas or some advice on how we can do better? Who wants to start? Bradley?
I'll jump in. I think the first place to start, and Scott said it well, is to increase self-awareness and understand yourself and create a safe space for these kind of conversations. You mentioned leaning in. I think leaning in, it does a few things. It sets the tone for honest discourse. It shows and displays vulnerability, and it gives us a framework in which we can actually work against discrimination against all marginalized groups. I think another important part is to make sure that we include different voices and styles to the table. So, you mentioned at the boardroom, there was issues around, who people listen to. I think women have in all marginalized groups have a voice to be heard, and it's incumbent upon us privileged individuals to make sure that they are heard.
Absolutely. I think it's just so true. I'm going to ask everybody to prepare questions. I think Kathleen's going to come back at some stage and have questions for us. So please type your questions in the chat box, everybody. So who's going to speak next? Mary Beth?
Yeah, no, Annette, I'm just listening and I'm thinking, you were talking about what can we do and how do we create spaces that are more inclusive. And one of the things we kind of talked about on Friday that I wanted to bring up and make sure that we talk about today is how difficult that can be when we're rushing from one meeting to the next, and there's so many things that are seemingly on the agenda that need to happen now. And how do we create space? Like, we have to realize that some of these conversations are hard, and this is coming from somebody who often speaks up in meetings and in like around the table, and I do bravely step up, but that's hard to do, and it often is met with resistance because people aren't expecting it sometimes. And so there is this emotional piece, or at least we need to create space where people can synthesize, understand, think about what they're doing before rushing off to the next meeting. And I feel like right now during the pandemic, there's less of that, despite the fact that we're not, like moving from place to place. There's less time because you're jumping from one meeting right into the next meeting, right into the next meeting. There's not even walking time in between these meetings. And so I think giving space to think about and talk about and reflect on what these conversations are and how they're changing or how they're not. And that's a really important piece as well. And then just while I have my microphone off mute, we were talking about reconciliation. And I'm really glad that you're saying, like, there's the boardroom conversations are changing, because I think they have to. The leadership has to come from the top as much as from the bottom. But in the past year during the pandemic, reconciliation, actually, the research shows that people are stepping back from reconciliation. Where we were making progress, now the issues of Indigenous identity and the support for Indigenous voices has actually decreased in the past year because of the pandemic, because people are now saying, well, I'm just as vulnerable as you are. Well, no, actually, that's not the case, and that's where the intersectionality piece comes in. Is Indigenous people are in Canada feeling the effects of the pandemic much more strongly, especially if you're in a remote community, or if you're in a community where there's lots of people, like living in housing conditions that are below, like the national standard, which they are. You're feeling that 10 times more, and the risks are 10 times higher, especially since you're probably also far away from hospitals. You're also far away from being able to get internet connectivity. It's issues that we sometimes take for granted that we really need to be able to question and talk about, and discuss what those implications are for the economy overall and for communities.
Great point, Mary Beth. I got a question here. What advice would you give women on how they can get involved in joining local boards or community groups throughout the island? Who wants to take that?
I don't think it's hard. I think we're always looking for people. You just let somebody know that you're looking for those positions, and they will welcome you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think.
Go ahead, Annette.
I think, Sarah. I think that when I was a young girl here, and I participated in everything that I could. There was an organization called Vision, and I wanted to get the community to work together and create economic employment and opportunity. And in many ways you can create your own institution. I started Cape Breton Voices a while back, four years ago, and a bunch of women, including Amanda McDougall, including Erica Shea, who's now the CEO of Newdon, including Jill McPherson, who runs the cider house. Look, there's so much opportunity for people to get engaged and to make this community better economically and socially. And I think that in the old days, the social stuff wasn't as important as the economic stuff. I think that's changing. And anybody that can manage an institution that or be a leader in a community organization that can really create change is such an attribute to any other organization around. So
I was just going to say,
Sarah,
the simple form is ask. If you're not being invited to those tables, ask to be there. And once you get there, be confident in your contributions and what you can bring to that table. And again, going back to that language, because I really think our communication is important in this and building that confidence. And Bradley touched on the asymmetrical power balances before, and that can come through our communication as well. So when you get there, challenge yourself to see if your relational use of communication as women can become more action-oriented. Don't say I think, or use those hedges or tentative forms of communication when you're describing your thought or communicating your thought. Say, I know, this is how I see it. This is what I think we should do. We should do this because. Don't feel like you need to soften your impact or soften your communication to get your point across, because that's the communication pattern or behavior that the people around the table may be used to seeing from women. We can challenge those stereotypical uses of communication to be more effective.
Yeah, Sarah, I would say that in my whole career, I only got a job offer once, and that was Home Depot. Every other one I created. So you know what? Every other one I created. And so I think you can create what you want to. And I just can't overemphasize confidence, the ability to use, will, that confidence is just amazing. And it really, and you've got to do your homework. You've got to find that community organization. You don't wait for people to come to you. I've never waited my whole life for anybody to come to me. What right do I have? I went out, and I think being proactive and really, making sure that you're part of that will get you to wherever you want to get to. Okay, is there a central list on CBRM website listing the boards that we can join? Okay, I'm sure that
I don't
think
think
for you, Amanda.
Sorry, Annette. I'm just watching the chat.
So,
There's a number of questions that are coming in around getting on boards and getting involved. And I think I tell this to my students all the time, especially when they're teaching entrepreneurship. We're talking about idea hunting and how do you get involved in the community is you go out and you start volunteering and you start asking more questions. And like Sarah said, you volunteer and you pay attention. It's not just a matter of getting on boards. It's a matter on getting on boards of things that you're passionate about and you're interested in. And once you get out in the community doing some of these volunteer opportunities, that's when people will start inviting you to come along. If you're voicing your opinions, people will see you as a leader and they'll want to recognize that you're interested. That's been my experience anyhow.
Yeah, great point, Mary Beth. It really is. Scott, Brad, anything that you want to add
I'd just like
to
to
this
maybe
conversation?
pick up where Mary Beth left off in terms of leadership. You know, we often look at leadership as a position. And it's not a position. It's how you think and how you treat others and how you view the world. So for anybody out there that's listening and is wondering about leadership, we're all leaders in our own right. It's just how much we want to stand up for the things we believe in and support those we care about.
I think too, just the importance of taking your own ownership of something as well. And sometimes we can get bogged down about what we hear or past experiences and try to run with your own experience. I work with a lot of students who tell me that, you know, they were talking to so-and-so or that they don't want to get involved because they're discouraged by some other comments. Try to look beyond that negative comment and really run with it. And also always try to have a support person. Because sometimes it can be challenging being the only person around the table that may have a different point of view, but it's important that you stay it because sometimes you're not the only one that thinks it. There's others, but they may not have that voice. So really trying to understand where your voice is and what that voice looks like, but then also always make sure you have somebody to talk to.
Yeah, Scott, I think you make such a good point there. You know, sponsorship and really having allies. You know, in the beginning, my beginning years in business, I was very lonely, but there were people that sponsored me. You know, Purdy Crawford sponsored me, Joe Shannon sponsored me. There were people in the business community that I was in that sponsored me, and you have to find them, right? And it is tough being alone sometimes, but I think there are more and more allies out there because the needs for diversity and inclusion at every table, no matter what table that we're talking about, is going to be critical. People are not leaving companies, they're leaving leaders. And if you're seen as a leader that isn't listening to people of diverse thinking and attitudes, you're not going to be successful. You're not going to go places. You're not going to be what you can be or the contribution that you can make. So look, let me see. What other questions do we have? How are we doing there? I got Kathleen. Are you behind there? I'll just go to my questions. Okay. So look, I think we have to be alert, and there comes Kathleen. I'm just worried about the Q&A.
So I can happily, we can do it either way. There are good questions here, and I have been keeping track, but I can certainly ask them to each of you. And Annette, you can certainly participate in answering some of them if you'd like to do it that way. Awesome. Okay, so let's do it that way. And we have a few more minutes left, and we still have everyone who logged in over an hour ago still engaged with us, which is fantastic. So obviously this is a captivating conversation, and I have been so impressed so far. So let's keep the ball rolling. So Heather Malcolm asked, what advice would you give to women that feel overwhelmed by those systematic biases and feel discouraged from striving for leadership roles? Which I think is such a poignant question. So I don't know who wants to begin. And again, Annette, you can feel free to interject as a panelist throughout these questions as well.
Okay. Kathleen, to that question, I think the opportunities are becoming greater in leadership positions, and people are looking for more diversity. But you have to be really good at what you're doing. And, that is the criteria. You have to perform really well, okay? And so when you're seen to be that leader, you're seen to have that opportunity, and that next jobs comes up, and and people are recognizing, look, we need diversity at the table. That you go after that. You go after it. You find it, and you build up your career, your performance. You have to be seen to be a great performer to move ahead in terms of if you make that choice. But I just don't stop. Don't give up. You've got to figure out how to get to the top of that mountain. There are different paths, and you've got to find which path works for you. And you have to look at yourself inside and look at yourself outside, and just push really hard. I'm just an average kid from a farmer's family in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and look what I did with the little that I had. But I kept making myself better. I kept trying to figure out, where's my weaknesses? Where are those weaknesses that I have? And I would either find a person that was really strong in my weakness, or I would learn. And so it's being curious, and it's, understanding, and you'll be recognized if you have all those things.
If I could jump in on that, that's very well said, Annette, and you're a shining example of what that can culminate into. It's so encouraging and inspiring to hear that. And I think another thing that we can remember and look at within ourselves, and the panelists touched on this already, is that critical reflection and self-awareness and self-assessment piece. Always being willing to improve your communication, to be able to communicate with confidence your opinions and thoughts and ideas, and be receptive and actively listen to those around you, and challenge your reaction to those at times. I always tell my students, I teach students from across all of the programs, so not just art students or communication students, but science and business, etc. And I say it's one thing to have a really great idea. It's another thing entirely to be able to to effectively communicate that idea to someone else. So regardless of the industry or sector you're interested in going in, you need to have those foundational communication skills to be able to communicate your abilities, your desires, your goals to the people around you, and work hard to get those. Another thought that came to mind listening to that was, we also have to demand as women that the invitation to the table isn't performative, that people aren't just trying to reach a quota so that they look good from the outside in and inviting you to the table to be that representative or representative, or to fill that gap and fill that certain set of behaviors, so that when we get there, we can demand certain things or share our thoughts and opinions with confidence. And that, I think, will come from your effective and communication skills, and be willing to improve those as you go along.
Kathy, I just want to add to that question, because what that question resonated with me was, first of all, one token woman does not mean your company is diverse. One token person of any type of background does not mean your company is diverse. And one of the big things I would love to speak to the business community and those that have the capacity to make changes, systemic inequalities that exist in hiring and systemic inequalities that exist in policies. One policy does not fit everything. So I challenge you, as this day is, to reflect on the policies, to reflect on your hiring, to reflect on all of those things that maybe unknowingly, systemically, are barriers for people like the individual who asked the question about getting that opportunity into the door. So that's my challenge for the business leaders today upon that question.
Scott. I was just going to say, Scott, it's so well said. And I think you can describe the difference between equity and equality for people. That might really help understand how to break down those systemic barriers as well, like the difference between the two.
2 points I want to make, Scott. I really, what you said is profound. It's absolutely so critical in terms of moving forward. But I want to make the point here that we haven't talked about entrepreneurship, and I want to challenge women, particularly on International Women's Day, to consider that as a career option, and really take a look to see, and you will hone skills. It's risky, I know. It's a big challenge, but there are more and more women going into small and medium-sized companies, and I think there is such an opportunity for us there. And I think those companies will grow into large companies, and there is just I think it's unstoppable if we really think about these opportunities in the way, in terms of where women can go and what they can do. And twice in my career, I went the entrepreneurial route, and it worked for me. And I've been in big companies as well. But, I think really, I just think there's so much potential. And women are very successful in small business. They are very successful, very financially viable.
And we don't have to look far to see examples
there.
of that in Cape Breton. Women entrepreneurs are leading the community here lately. There's been a surge, and it's so exciting and inspiring to see that. So I challenge everyone to look for those, learn about those entrepreneurs, and support women in business in this community. And
sorry.
Go ahead, Bradley.
No, I was just going to add to what Sarah mentioned. I think it's time as a community we really start celebrating our women in business and put them on a pedestal to show not only other women but other community members that women are capable of doing, just as much as anybody in this world.
And I was just going to add to what everybody's saying around, it comes full circle. So what Scott said about policy and change, there's lots of great ideas, but I've also talked to many entrepreneurs, especially students from India or students from the First Nations communities who are trying to open their businesses, and they go into the banks or they go in and looking for advice from local partners here. And it's like they have the blinder, the people that they're going to talk to are reading off a policy document and just saying, oh, I'm sorry, this isn't a good idea because it doesn't check these boxes, or this isn't an idea that's going to make money. And that's, in my opinion, it's antithetical to entrepreneurship. We're coming up with ideas, we're trying to do things differently, and the supports also need to be there. So whether you're in the business community or you're there to help support these entrepreneurial people or these entrepreneurial ideas, you have to be ready to challenge yourself there as well. And maybe something's not quite ready or it doesn't check the boxes yet, but we need to do a better job of supporting people within the community and saying, well, this is a great idea. It's not quite there. Here's some things that you need to do or that you can do, and here are some other resources. Not just shut it down and stop the conversation there. To mentor, to support, to advocate for other people and help redirect them, I think is really important too.
Mary Beth, they're often the most successful people in society and in business, those that you don't notice, right? And to your point, Scott, years ago, I started at Home Depot. I said, you know what, every new slate of candidates for a job is going to have, at least if there's three candidates, one has got to be a woman. Another person's got to be a person of color. And you know what? It worked. But that was a policy that was, I think, a good one created for. But you see, so many people with blinders on. So many people, doesn't fit in that box. Well, there's no boxes anymore. These are sandboxes. These are places that need to be fluid. There need to be amoebas, because you're going to lose that opportunity. You're going to lose that talent. You're going to lose that opportunity to be extraordinarily successful if you just keep your mind closed to these opportunities. They're all over the place. Open your mind, listen, and genuinely accept things that you don't like. There are people around me all my life in my career that I'm not that comfortable with, but I want them in the tent. I want them working with me, right? And so, but you find different ways to do that. And we can't be this stringent. We can't be that siloed in the way we think. We need to be,
That is so good. I think that,
and
and clearly there's so many people in the chat that are agreeing with you, Annette, and I think that's all really important things to remember that each of you offered. We are now nearing the end of the session, but I do want to ask one more question of each of the panelists, and Annette, I would love for you to answer as well. But with the theme of International Women's Day being Choose to Challenge, my question to each of you is, what is one thing that you would challenge each of the people watching this panel today in ways in which they can better allow and make space for gender parity and gender balance within their peer groups, within their workplaces, and much like to all of you chatted about, which I couldn't agree more with, that we all, are leaders within our community. Leadership is not a title, it's an action. And so what is one thing that you would challenge every single person watching this right now that they can start doing today or this week or this year that can help us move closer to gender parity, whether you're a woman or a male? So I don't know who wants to start. Maybe we'll start with Mary Beth and then we'll move throughout.
Thanks for putting me on the spot, Kathleen. The one thing that I try and do when I ask people to change is, going back to the very beginning of this conversation, is consider what we know and what we don't know. Where is there some things when it comes up, like we talk about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the calls to action. If you hear that and you don't know what it's referring to, go back and do some research or try and learn. The same thing for missing and murdered Indigenous women, and perhaps that's more important, is to not just other it and say, well, that's not an issue here because for whatever reason you're going to use as an excuse. It's an issue that all of Canadian society needs to be aware of, and we need to think, are you turning a blind eye? How am I reacting to this? What is that creating when I hear these things? And just start thinking more reflectively about what our reactions are when we hear news stories or when we hear things that are going on, and consider whether or not we're positively reacting or we're ignoring or what we're doing in that respect, and then act from there. But we need to listen more, and we need to really think about how what we're hearing impacts what we're doing.
Fantastic. Okay, who's next? Sarah?
Sure, thank you. And that was a great challenge, Mary Beth. I really appreciate that. I'll go back. I might sound like a broken record, but I go back to the language piece, and it really starts at home. So I think really reflecting on your own use of language, how you describe yourself and other people, what language you're using around your children, because have no doubt about it, these behaviors are learned, and it's an uphill climb. And cultural and linguistic changes are slow to implement, but they have major impact. My students always say, but why? Does this really matter? Will this impact change? And my answer is always yes, yes, yes. These small changes, these small everyday changes that each one of us are responsible for will create major ripple effect and impact major change in what we demand in our society and the norms that we're creating for our communities. And some simple, tangible language changes that I'll challenge all of you to start using is just try to drop your man-linked language to be more representative and inclusive of everyone. So instead of saying the fireman, you would say the firefighter. And an example I use is, I was married 2 years ago, and I stayed with my salutation of Miss, MS, because it's equal to Mr. When my husband goes somewhere and they see Mr. Mccray, no one knows his relationship status because it does not mean anything to them for his capabilities of his job. I was a Miss MISS, an MRS Mrs., and MS. Those terms are rooted deep in some historical context that has a lower power connotation to it. So I use Miss because my relationship status doesn't matter or impact the ability for me to do my job either. So that's a small change. Just challenge yourself to look at the language you're using and be more inclusive in the language you're using at home and in the workplace.
Excellent. That's really, really fascinating. I had no idea about that, about salutations. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Wow.
Kathleen, I've used Miss my whole life. I've never changed. And boy, the people were so critical of me. How dare you not take your husband's name? Oh my God.
And be willing
Yeah,
to challenge
it's
that in
unbelievable.
that, right? Did
Yeah.
anyone
So
ever say, right, Mrs.?
Yeah.
And people just think, well, just let it go. And I think, no, I cannot let that go. It's Miss, MS. So just be confident in correcting that.
I love that. What about you, Scott?
Exactly.
I think really to educate yourself, challenge your own bias. We all have them. We're humans. We have bias. Don't be afraid to admit when we have them. Don't make assumptions. Ask questions. When we're kids, we love to ask questions. Why is the sky blue? Why is this? But as adults, it's like an insecurity. We need to do more of asking questions and invest in those questions, invest in those insights, and acknowledge our responsibilities, because we all have responsibilities and we need to acknowledge them. What can we do? Everybody has the capacity to make change. Every single person that's listening has the capacity to truly make change. And don't forget to say thank you. You know, I thank the women who have inspired me to get into the field of diversity and inclusion. I thank the women who have paved the way for equality and equity. And sometimes we get kind of selfish and we forget to say thank you to all of those who are making change. So on this happy International Women's Day, I say thank you to the many women who have shaped my life.
Thank you, Scott. And Bradley.
I would echo what Scott said in thanking the strong women in my life as well. And with that being said, one of the key drivers to understanding gender parity is to not stand by and let discrimination against women take place. You want to actively work against it. Be that voice, that ally, speak up, but not over the women you're supporting. And to the women on the panel today, my hope would that you go after it, because that's how you learn, is by going after things, being uncomfortable, and then learning from that.
Wonderful. And Annette.
Oh, it's hard. Look, I agree with everything that my panel said. What an amazing group of people we have with us today. The most important thing for me, and it emanates from what Sarah says, the way you bring up your children, the opportunities you see in them, the way you present, your biases. They're all over the place. It's amazing. I see them today, but I think, influence young people. This is where it needs to start. I think we can fix ourselves along the way, but if we don't get that right, the early childhood development, young women are not see themselves as equal to young boys. That's where the problem starts. And so
I love that. Wow, so good. Knew I would be so impressed, and I know just from the comments that are coming across that you're all seeing that everyone who's participating is truly impressed. And I just wrote down each of those lessons, which we'll share certainly on social media afterwards to share with our broader audience that wasn't able to tune in today. We also recorded this session, so we will definitely share this because this is an important conversation, as I know you would all agree, and one that we want as many people as possible to listen to and partake in and learn from. And I think all of you had so much incredible wisdom and lived experience to offer today. And thank you so much. I know each of you are so busy, and we so appreciate it. And thank you certainly, Annette, for being such a phenomenal moderator and an example. And I think that is in large part why we felt it was really important for you to moderate this panel today, because we are so proud to have you as a fellow Cape Bretoner, as we all are. But you are also are such a shining example of what is possible for women. And you have created an incredible dialogue and have done things like publishing a book about this exactly, around the importance to have gender parity and gender balance around decision-making tables. And I've always admired your stance on the importance of having that diversity, that it was never, women can't go at this alone, And I think you've all acknowledged that today in your own, from your own experiences and your own understanding of these issues. And that men have to be a part of this conversation. And I know that I said this at the beginning, and you know, it's really important to have Bradley and Scott as two representatives within our own community that are already doing this work. And that I know from a personal standpoint and knowing them and speaking with them, that this is not something that they just bring to panel discussions today. This is something that they bring into all conversations on a Friday night at, you know, Island Folk, or, you know, a Tuesday morning in a meeting, right? Like, this is the work that they're passionate about. And, you know, we will not achieve gender parity alone, and certainly not just, it's not just a women's issue, and we'll reinstate that. I quickly just want to say thank you to Amanda with the CBRM, Lynn at the United Way, and Carla at the Cape Breton Partnership for working alongside me to making this happen with the Chamber today. Again, this was such an incredibly informative and inspiring conversation. And I would be remiss to not mention, we had a couple of restaurants come on today to offer lunch specials in honor of International Women's Day in this panel. Typically, we would have these sessions like this in person, but the world has changed, as we know, but it's, I think it's going to go back to a time where we can come together, which will be wonderful in the hopefully near future. But Governors, the Old Triangle, the Boardwalk Tap Room, Daniels, and Flavor Downtown, all in which are owned by male entrepreneurs, but saw the value and see the value in International Women's Day and the importance of this conversation. And all proceeds from their daily specials are going to local women's groups here in our community. So I thought that was really cool. And Lynn McCarran at the United Way, yes. Lynn McCarran at the United Way really worked to make that happen and make those partnerships. Nice. So I know that we're well over our time, but thank you all for being so generous with your time. Thank you to each of you, Annette, Bradley, Mary Beth, Sarah, and Scott, for being a part of this conversation. And I look forward to continuing it, because I think it's one that shouldn't happen once a year, but we have a lot to learn. So thank you all so much. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Thank you, everybody.